Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight we journey through Skyrim's Daedric artifacts and the dark, aching stories that made them. Weapons and wishes and prices paid by people who never saw the cost coming. Some of these bargains you'll recognize from quests you've completed a dozen times without ever learning what they truly cost the people caught inside them. Others hide in corners of Tamriel. Most players walk past without a second glance. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight and what games you want me to cover next. And subscribe if this helps you sleep. The Ebony Blade. Deep beneath Dragon's Reach, in a chamber that even the Jarl of Whiterun rarely speaks of, there is a locked door. It has been there for longer than anyone in the city can remember, and for most of Whiterun's modern history, only the Jarl himself and his most trusted court wizard have known what waits behind it. It is not a treasure vault. It is not a prison for some forgotten enemy. It is something stranger and colder than either of those things. It is a listening post for a god, and behind it rests a sword that should never have been allowed to stay quiet for so long. The sword is the Ebony Blade, sometimes called the Vampire, sometimes called the Leech, and it belongs to Mephala, the Daedric prince known as the Web Spinner, the Spider, the Lady of Whispers. Mephala's sphere is not fire or plague or madness in the way some of her siblings among the Daedra deal in those things openly. Her domain is subtler and in some ways far more unsettling. She governs sex, secrets, murder, and the intricate invisible webs that connect one mortal heart to another. Where Molag Bal favors brute, unmistakable domination, and Boethia incites entire nations toward conspiracy and open treason, Mephala prefers something far more intimate. The knife in the back from someone you trusted completely. She is the patron of assassins who work through intimacy rather than through force. The goddess of betrayal dressed in the clothing of love. The Ebony Blade takes the shape of a curved ebony sword, closer in design to a daikatana or an akaviri blade than to the standard swords carried by Skyrim soldiers. And this shape alone tells part of its story, because it suggests origins far from Tamriel's western holds, origins tangled up with the mysterious Akaviri, who once invaded these lands and left behind fragments of a culture nobody fully understands anymore. In Khajiit myth, the sword is never named directly. It is instead called the killing word of the spider, or the black edge of shadow, names that carry the same unease a person feels when they realize a friend has been quietly working against them for years without a single visible sign. The path to even learning the blade exists is itself built on the same kind of quiet gossip Mephala would probably approve of. Rather than a quest marker appearing out of nowhere, the trail typically begins with something as mundane as asking Hulda, the innkeeper at the Bannered Mare, whether she's heard any interesting rumors lately. Tucked in among talk of bandits and bad harvests is a passing mention that something is wrong in the Jarl's own household, that his children are behaving strangely, that people would do well to keep their distance. It is a small, almost throwaway detail, the kind of thing easy to miss entirely, and yet it is the only warning Whiterun's ordinary citizens receive that a Daedric prince has quietly re-established contact with their ruling family. Getting the key to the door itself requires either pickpocketing it from Bolgruf or his court, wizard Farengar, or, in a darker and more literal echo of the Blade's own philosophy, simply killing Farengar and taking it from his corpse. A choice that turns retrieving Mephala's sword into an act of the very betrayal it will later demand in earnest. What makes the Ebony Blade different from almost every other weapon in Tamriel is not its craftsmanship, though it is finely made, and not even its raw combat power, though it is formidable in a fight. What makes it different is the price it demands. The blade has an enchantment that drains health from anyone it strikes and channels that stolen life into the wielder, and this alone would mark it as a dangerous weapon, of the kind any competent thief or mercenary might covet. But its true power, the power that makes it a Daedric artifact and not merely a cursed sword, only awakens through betrayal. To charge the Ebony Blade to its full strength, its wielder must kill people who trust them, not enemies, not strangers, friends, companions who have fought beside them, people they have done favors for, people who greet them warmly, people who believe, in that fragile and precious way that mortals believe in one another, that they are safe. This is Mephalah's genius and her cruelty in a single design. She did not create a sword that rewards violence in general. She created a sword that specifically punishes and profits from the destruction of trust itself. Every kill with the blade against a stranger accomplishes nothing toward its true potential. It must feed on relationships. It must feed on the exact bonds that hold a mortal society together, the promises and understandings that let people sleep soundly beside one another, that let a follower march into a dragon's lair beside you because they believe you will not lead them somewhere you would not go yourself. Mephalah takes all of that fragile architecture of human and mer connection, and turns it into fuel. Determining who actually counts as a friend for the blade's purposes is left almost entirely to observation, rather than any clear marker on screen, which only deepens the sword's unsettling design. The game never labels which NPCs qualify. Instead, the Dragonborn has to listen, actually listen, to the small things people say in casual greeting. Phrases like, "You've been a good friend to me, that means something," or "It's a fine day with you around." Offhand warmth that most players would otherwise walk straight past without a second thought. Mephalah's blade forces you to notice affection you might never have consciously registered, and then asks you to weaponize the noticing itself. Files left behind in the game's own construction hint that this discomfort was meant to run even deeper than what made it into the final release. Unused content in the game's files suggests Jarl Balgruf's other children were originally meant to play some further role in this same unfolding tragedy. One apparently scrapped before launch, along with an entire cut sequence involving young Frother and a horse at the stables. Fragments of a darker, more elaborate family tragedy that the finished quest only gestures toward, rather than fully tells. For centuries, the blade passed through history, leaving exactly the kind of wreckage you would expect from an object built around betrayal. It corrupted great men and women, twisting ambitions that might once have been noble into something monstrous. Because once you have tasted the power that comes from murdering someone who loved you, the logic of the blade begins to feel almost reasonable. Why not use it again? Why not identify the next person whose trust can be converted into strength? The Ebony Blade does not force its wielder to become a monster. It simply makes becoming a monster efficient, even lucrative, and leaves the moral collapse entirely in the wielder's own hands, which somehow makes it worse. Eventually, sometime in the Fourth Era, the blade found its way into the possession of the Jarl of Whiterun, and whoever that Jarl was, they seemed to have understood exactly what they were holding, because they tried to destroy it. They took the Ebony Blade to the Skyforge, the ancient forge above Jorvaska, where the finest weapons in Skyrim's history have been tempered in flames hot enough to work even the toughest ores. The Skyforge's fires are not ordinary fires. They are said to burn hotter than any forge should be able to burn, fed by techniques and materials whose origins are lost to time. And still, the Ebony Blade would not melt, Worse than simple resistance, witnesses reported that the coals themselves seemed to cool when the blade was placed within them, as though the sword were drawing warmth out of the flame, the same way it drained health from flesh, refusing to be unmade by a force weaker than the will of a Daedric prince. Unable to destroy it, the Jarl did what generations of desperate rulers have done with objects too dangerous to keep and too dangerous to release. They hid it. They sealed it in a chamber deep within Dragon's Reach, behind a locked door, with access granted only to the Jarl and the court wizard. And for a long while, that solution held. The blade sat in darkness. The whispering stopped, or at least nobody was close enough to hear it. That changed in the year 4 E201, when Nelkir, the youngest son of Jarl Bolgruf the Greater, wandered somewhere he should not have gone and found the door. Nelkir was already a strange, brooding child by most accounts, the kind of boy servants spoke about in careful, worried tones, and whatever fragile psychological walls kept most people from hearing Mephalah's whispers simply were not present in him, or were thin enough that she found a way through. She began speaking to him through the door, not overtly, not in a way anyone else could hear, but enough that the boy started referring to a whispering lady, enough that his behavior grew more withdrawn and more unsettling, enough that rumors began to spread through Whiterun about the Jarl's dark child. When you arrive in Whiterun and begin to hear these rumors yourself, you find a household in quiet crisis. Bolgruf is a capable ruler and a reasonably attentive father, but he has no idea how to handle a son who talks about a woman behind a locked door that, as far as the household staff know, does not officially exist. Investigating the whispering door means confronting exactly what centuries of careful containment were meant to prevent. Mephalah making contact again, patient and amused, delighted that someone new has finally come looking. When you finally open the door and take up the Ebony Blade, you discover something almost pitiable about it. Having spent so long locked away, unused, unfed, the sword is weakened. It does not match the fearsome weapon of legend. It is diminished, hungry, and Mephalah tells you plainly what it will take to restore it. Blood of deceit, the blood of people who trust you. She is not subtle about this request, because subtlety was never the point. The subtlety was already spent centuries ago, woven into the whispers and the slow corruption of great men and women across history. Now, with a new bearer in front of her, she simply states her price outright, almost businesslike, the same way any craftsman might explain what materials are needed to finish a masterwork. You are never obligated to accept this bargain. The quest completes the moment you retrieve the blade, whether or not you ever strengthen it, and many who walk this path choose to leave the sword in its weakened state forever, a quiet refusal to participate in Mephalah's arithmetic of loyalty and murder. But if you do choose to feed it, each pair of betrayed friends earns you another fragment of the blade's true power, and Mephalah speaks to you personally each time, savoring the moment, until after the 10th victim she finally declares herself satisfied. "At last my blade is returned to its full glory," she says. "Now go forth, child. Continue your tiny subversions against the orders of trust and intimacy." It is a chillingly honest mission statement. She does not pretend the blade exists for justice or protection or even personal gain. It exists to subvert trust and intimacy, to prove over and over, across centuries and across countless unsuspecting victims, that the bonds mortals form with one another are fragile, replaceable, and ultimately exploitable by anyone willing to pay the price. What lingers longest about the Ebony Blade story is not the sword itself, but what its existence implies about Mephalah. Most Daedric princes want something concrete from their followers. Souls for Molag Bal, chaos for Sheogorath, territory and dominance for Boethia. Mephala wants something far stranger. She wants proof, repeated endlessly across generations, that no relationship is truly unbreakable, that every friendship carries within it the seed of its own betrayal, waiting only for the right blade and the right moment of weakness to bloom. The Ebony Blade is not just a weapon. It is an argument she has been making for thousands of years, carved in ebony and fed on grief, and every wielder who charges it to full strength becomes, whether they intend to or not, another piece of evidence in her favor. There is something worth noticing too, in the fact that Mephala chose a child as her final conduit before the blade returned to circulation. Nelkir was not a warrior, not a priest, not someone who came looking for power the way most seekers of Daedric artifacts do. He was simply young, unhappy, and isolated enough that a patient whisperer could slip through the cracks nobody else in Dragon's Reach thought to check. It says something uncomfortable about Mephala's methods, that her preferred way back into the world was not through ambition or greed at all, but through loneliness, through a child nobody had quite figured out how to reach first. By the time the last Dragonborn arrives to sort out the mess, Nelkir's fate is left mostly unresolved. His disposition may improve slightly once the whispering door is finally opened and the blade removed from beneath his home. But the game never promises he walks away from the experience entirely unmarked, and there is a quiet, unsettling implication in that ambiguity, that some doors, once a prince as old and as patient as Mephala has found them, are never fully closed again, no matter how carefully the household above them tries to forget they exist. Azura's Star and the Black Star. South of Winterhold, on a rise overlooking the frozen coast, there stands a shrine built by refugees who fled a homeland destroyed by fire and ash. The Dunmer, who settled there after the Red Year, carried little with them across the sea, but they carried their devotion to Azura, the Daedric Prince of Dusk and Dawn, twilight given form, and they built her a place of worship in a land that must have felt as unforgiving as the one they left behind. It is here, at the shrine of Azura, that one of the saddest and most quietly horrifying stories among Skyrim's Daedric artifacts begins, not with monsters or demons, but with a dying man's desperate refusal to accept his own mortality. The choice to build that shrine specifically to Azura, rather than to any of the other gods and princes the Dunmer might have turned to in their grief, carries its own quiet weight once you consider what actually happened to their homeland. By most accounts passed down among her faithful, Azura gave her priests in Vardenfell a vision that led them away from the island before the Red Mountain erupted, sparing them the catastrophe that claimed so many who stayed behind. For the Dunmer who eventually settled this cold stretch of Skyrim's coast, worship of Azura was never a distant, abstract act of piety. It was gratitude, specific and personal, owed to the one deity among a pantheon of often indifferent princes who had actually tried to save them. That context makes what happens next, one dying mage's attempt to twist her most sacred artifact into a tool for cheating death entirely, feel less like an isolated act of madness and more like a genuine betrayal of the very goddess whose warning had already once given an entire people a second chance at survival. Azura's Star, sometimes called the Twilight Star, is one of the most recognizable Daedric artifacts across all of Tamriel's history. In appearance, it resembles a large, intricately faceted throwing star or gemstone, 8 prongs radiating outward from a glowing center. and it serves as Azura's personal symbol as much as it serves any practical function. Its power, though, is what makes it so coveted among mages and assassins alike. In the right hands, Azura's star functions as a reusable soul gem of essentially unlimited capacity. Ordinary soul gems shatter after a single use. Their captured essence spent the moment it powers an enchantment. Azura's star does not shatter. It can be filled and emptied indefinitely, a permanent vessel for something as intimate and irreplaceable as a living soul, which tells you something important about Azura herself. She does not simply grant power, she grants permanence, a strange kind of everlasting quality wrapped around whatever she touches, and this is precisely what drew Malyn Varen to her. Malyn Varen was once a respected teacher at the College of Winterhold, a Dunmer mage with genuine skill and a circle of loyal students who admired him. What none of them knew, not his colleagues, not his closest disciples, was that Malyn was dying. Some wasting illness had taken hold of him, slow and merciless, the kind of disease that gives a man plenty of time to think about death, while offering him no way to escape it. And so, quietly, without telling anyone the true nature of his research, Malyn began studying Azura's star, not out of scholarly curiosity, but because he believed he had found a way to cheat his own end. If the star could hold a soul forever without breaking, he reasoned, then perhaps it could hold his soul. Perhaps, if he sealed himself inside it at the moment of death, some fragment of him could persist indefinitely, immortal in the truest and strangest sense of the word. There was a problem with his plan, one that Malyn either did not initially understand or refused to accept. Azura's star, in its original and pure form, can only accept white souls, the souls of animals and lesser creatures, not the black souls of sentient, thinking beings like men and Mer. Malyn's own soul, being that of a mortal person, simply could not enter the star as it was. This should have been the end of his research. Instead, it became the beginning of his unraveling. As Malyn pushed further into forbidden experimentation, trying to find some way around the star's fundamental nature, something in him began to break. Nellakar, one of his former students, later described the change to anyone willing to listen. Malyn started hearing voices that weren't there. He saw people who weren't present. He grew paranoid and erratic, snapping at students over things they had never said, his once brilliant mind curdling under the weight of whatever forces he was tampering with. Nellakar himself came to believe that Azura was punishing his old mentor directly, that the further Malyn pushed toward defiling her sacred artifact, the harder her curse bore down on him, a kind of divine retribution escalating in step with his blasphemy. Whether that account is precisely true, or whether Malyn's own guilt and terminal illness were simply consuming him from within, regardless of any divine hand, the results were the same either way. His sanity was going, piece by piece, and he had nothing left to lose. The breaking point came when Malyn, in the grip of whatever madness had taken hold of him, killed one of his own students and attempted to use her captured soul as a component in his research, perhaps testing whether her black soul could somehow bridge the gap he needed to cross. For this, the college expelled him, and rightfully so. No institution could tolerate a teacher who murders his students, no matter how brilliant his prior work had been. But expulsion did not stop Malyn. It simply removed the last restraints that had been slowing him down. He gathered his few remaining loyal disciples, the students who either did not know the full truth or who had already been drawn too far into his obsession to turn back, and together they left Winterhold for an abandoned imperial fort on the shores of Lake Ilinalta, a secluded and half-forgotten ruin far from the prying eyes of his former colleagues. There, free from oversight, Malin continued his experiments with a desperation that only grows sharper as death draws nearer. And there, through methods that remain only partially understood, even by those who later investigated his fate, he succeeded, at least partially, in doing what should have been impossible. He reverse-engineered Azura's sacred artifact, corrupting its fundamental nature so that it would finally accept a black soul, his own. He renamed his creation the Black Star, and in doing so, he achieved a form of immortality, though not the peaceful, triumphant kind he must have imagined when he first began his research. Sometime during this final phase of experimentation, the island beneath Malin's retreat gave way, and the entire compound collapsed into the lake, flooding from within. Local fisherfolk in Falkreath Hold began to whisper that the whole lake was cursed, that haunted spirits wandered its sunken halls and stole children from their cribs in the night. Superstitions that grew and calcified over the years, even as most people forgot the specific mage who had caused them. In the year 4E 201, Aranea Yenith, Azura's devoted priestess, sensed that something had gone deeply wrong with her goddess's artifact and tasked the last Dragonborn with recovering it. The trail led first to Nellikar, Malin's former student, now living a quiet and haunted life in Winterhold, still carrying the guilt and fear of what his old mentor had become. Nellikar told the Dragonborn everything: the disease, the madness, the murdered student, the flight to Ilinalta's deep, and made one final desperate request: don't return the star to Azura. Whatever that meant, whatever fear lived behind those words, Nellikar could not bring himself to fully explain it, and the Dragonborn had no real choice but to descend into the flooded ruin regardless. Ilinalta's deep, by that point, had become home to a coven of necromancers, the last remnants of Malin's original followers, still tending to whatever remained of their master's work generations after his supposed death. Deep within the flooded complex, in a chamber called Ilinalta's Deluge, the Dragonborn finally found Malin's skeleton, seated upon a makeshift throne, his grimoire resting beside him and the broken Azura's star at his feet. But touching the star did something none of Malin's own students could have prepared the Dragonborn for. It pulled them inside. Within the star's interior, reality bends into something unrecognizable. Crystalline paths suspended in an endless void, and there, waiting, was Malin Varen himself. Not dead at all in any conventional sense, sustained inside his own corrupted creation, attended by Dremora minions who had apparently been serving him for longer than anyone could say. "Ah," he says upon seeing the Dragonborn, mistaking them for a fresh offering sent by his followers. "My disciples have sent me a fresh soul. Good. I was getting hungry." This is the horrifying truth of what Malin achieved. His immortality was not eternal life in any meaningful sense. It was eternal hunger, a soul trapped and sustained only by continuous feeding, requiring his necromancer followers to keep supplying him with victims from the world above, generation after generation, an endless and grotesque supply chain built to prevent one man's fear of death from ever fully resolving into the peace that death was always supposed to bring. The Dragonborn is forced to destroy him, to finally end what should have ended naturally so long ago, and the star is recovered, broken and tainted by everything Malin poured into it. Even in this final confrontation, Malin is not a spent, feeble old man. He still commands a working mage's arsenal, shifting between destruction magic like chain lightning and ice spikes, alteration spells to harden his own flesh mid-battle, and enough presence of mind to keep 3 Dremora fighting at his side, proof that whatever centuries of isolation and hunger did to his sanity, they never touched his raw magical skill. Stranger still, the story does not end cleanly the moment his skeleton finally stops moving. Once the star has been cleansed, whether given to Nelacar or to Azura's own priestess, an unknown adversary sends 2 apprentice necromancers to hunt the Dragonborn down and attempt to reclaim it, a detail the game never fully explains. Nobody knows who sent them, or how they learned the star had resurfaced at all. And that unanswered thread is perhaps the most unsettling part of the whole affair. Proof that Malin's little coven at Ilinalta's Deep was never as isolated or as forgotten as it appeared, and that somewhere out there, someone else had been watching his research patiently enough to notice the exact moment it finally came to an end. From here, a choice presents itself, one of the more quietly significant moral decisions in the entire game. The broken star can be returned to Nelacar, who will purify it in a way that permanently transforms it into the Black Star, a Daedric artifact capable of capturing black souls just as easily as white ones, an incredibly useful and coveted tool for any mage or enchanter, but forever marked by the corruption that created it. Or it can be returned to Aranea and Azura herself, who will cleanse it back into its original form, restoring Azura's star to something closer to what it was before Malyn Varen ever laid eyes on it, though it can then only accept white souls once more, less useful in practical terms, but untainted by one man's desperate refusal to die. Aranea makes her feelings about the alternative unmistakably clear. If you choose to corrupt the star into its black form, rather than return it to her goddess, she considers it an act of defilement against a sacred object, and she will threaten you outright for the choice. This is not a small thing to her. Azura's star was never meant to be a tool. It was meant to be a symbol, an expression of Azura's nature as the twilight between 2 states, day and night, life and death, and Malyn's corruption of it represents a kind of theft, taking something meant to honor the boundary between mortality and eternity, and twisting it into a device that lets a mortal cheat that boundary entirely. What makes this story linger in the mind long after the quest ends is not really the necromancy or the Dremora, or even Malyn's grotesque, sustained hunger. It is the simple, universal fear that drove him there in the first place. He was dying, and he could not accept it. And so he spent his final months as a respected teacher pouring every ounce of his considerable talent into finding a loophole, any loophole, that might let him keep existing just a little longer. Many players who explore his notes and his grimoire come away with the uncomfortable sense that Malyn was never truly evil in the way Molag Bal's most devoted priests are evil. He was simply terrified. And terror, given enough time, enough power, and enough isolation from anyone who might have talked him back from the edge, curdled into something monstrous almost by accident. Azura's shrine still stands south of Winterhold, and Aranea still prays there today, watching over a goddess whose twilight nature Malyn Varen never understood, that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed, and that the space between life and death is not a gap to be exploited, but a threshold to be honored. Volendrung. In the forested hills of the Rift, tucked near the border with Cyrodiil, there is an orc stronghold called Largashbur, and by the time most travelers hear of it, it is already a place under siege, a community teetering on the edge of collapse. Orc strongholds throughout Skyrim are proud, self-sufficient places, communities that have learned through hard experience to trust almost no one outside their own walls. And Lagashbur was no different, until something happened that no amount of pride or self-sufficiency could fix. The tribe lost their shrine. Somewhere near Lagashbur sits Fallowstone Cave, and within it a shrine dedicated to Malakath, the Daedric prince of the spurned and ostracized, patron of orcs, of outcasts, of anyone who has been rejected by the societies that should have embraced them. Malakath's relationship with the orcs of Tamriel is deep and old, woven into the very origin stories many orc clans tell about themselves, and a shrine to him is not simply a religious decoration. It is a spiritual anchor, a source of identity and protection for a people who have spent much of their history fighting simply to be left alone. When giants overran the region and desecrated that shrine, driving off its defenders and claiming the site for themselves, it was not just a tactical loss for Lagashbur. It was, in the eyes of their god, an unforgivable humiliation. Malakath did not respond with sympathy. He responded with a curse. The tribe, in his eyes, had proven itself weak, unworthy of his protection, and so he withdrew that protection and replaced it with punishment. Giants began attacking Lagashbur directly, again and again, an unrelenting siege against a community that had already shown it could not properly defend even its own holy ground. Every day became a fight for survival, and the tribe's shaman, a wise woman named Atub, understood what needed to happen even if nobody wanted to hear it. They needed to beg forgiveness, and the only way to do that was to perform the ritual that would summon Malakath himself and hear his judgment directly. By the time the last Dragonborn arrives at Lagashbur, drawn there by rumors of a tribe under constant giant assault, the situation has clearly been deteriorating for some time. Atub is desperate for outside help, worn thin by weeks or months of relentless pressure, telling anyone who will listen that she hasn't slept properly in longer than she can remember. Chief Yamaz, the tribe's nominal leader, is a strange figure for an orc chieftain, visibly uncomfortable with confrontation, evasive, and openly relieved at the prospect of an outsider doing the dangerous work in his place. It is never fully explained in any text or dialogue exactly why Malakath's curse produced a leader like Yamaz specifically, but many who study the quest come away believing his weakness is not incidental. It reads almost like the curse made manifest in a single body, an entire tribe's failure concentrated into the personality of the man meant to lead them. With the Dragonborn's help, Atub performs the ritual, and Malakath's voice fills the longhouse, and it is not a gentle voice. He does not comfort his followers or offer easy absolution. He berates them openly and without restraint, demanding to know how a tribe of orcs could possibly have allowed giants to simply walk in and take what belonged to them. "You don't deserve to call yourself an orc," he tells Yamaz directly, and the insult lands exactly as intended. A Daedric prince questioning the very identity of the person meant to represent his people. Malakath's demand is simple and brutal in its clarity. Kill the leader of the giants, bring back his warhammer as an offering, and perhaps, only perhaps, the curse will be lifted. There is a quiet, unglamorous heroism buried in Atub's role throughout this entire ordeal, one easy to overlook next to the drama of Yamaz's cowardice and Malakath's fury. She is the one who holds the ritual together. She is the one whose faith never wavers even after weeks of sleepless nights and constant giant assaults. And she is the one who understood, long before anyone else in Lagashbur was willing to say it aloud, exactly what needed to happen. Nothing in the quests ever properly credits her for this. Malakath speaks to Yamaz, then to Gulazob. Addressing the chiefs directly, the way a prince concerned with strength and leadership naturally would, while the woman who kept the tribe's faith alive through its darkest stretch fades quietly back into the background the moment the crisis resolves, an unglamorous pattern that repeats itself, in one form or another, across a great many of Skyrim's stories about who gets remembered for holding a community together, and who simply gets thanked in passing before the credit moves elsewhere. Yamar's response to being handed this direct personal challenge from his own god is not courage. It is manipulation. He turns immediately to the Dragonborn, insisting they accompany him to the giant's lair, ostensibly for protection, but the truth becomes clear almost as soon as they arrive. Yamaz has no intention of actually fighting the giant himself. He wants the Dragonborn to do it, to kill the massive creature and let him walk away with the credit, the Warhammer, and Malakath's forgiveness, all while risking nothing himself. It is a plan built entirely around cowardice dressed up as strategy, and it tells you everything you need to know about why Malakath's disappointment in this particular chief ran so deep. What actually happens in the giant's lair, the specific details of Yamaz's fate, remains something the game leaves intentionally ambiguous. He may die at the hands of the giant. He was too frightened to fight himself. He may die at the hands of the Dragonborn, whether from simple self-defense against his cowardly betrayal, or from something closer to deliberate justice. What is certain is that Yamaz does not survive, and when the Dragonborn returns to Largashbur carrying the giant's warhammer, Malakath's voice returns as well, and this time it carries something closer to approval. The prince names a new chief, a warrior called Gulazob, someone the tribe can presumably trust not to hide behind outsiders when Malakath calls on them directly. And then, in a gesture that feels almost like a father finally proud of a child who has struggled for too long, Malakath takes the warhammer, the crude weapon looted from a giant's corpse, and transforms it. It becomes Volendrung, the Hammer of Might, one of the most physically imposing Daedric artifacts in all of Tamriel, and he gives it not to the tribe, but to the outsider who succeeded where their own chief had failed. There is a specific detail worth pausing on here. Malakath does not simply hand the hammer over. He instructs the Dragonborn to place Shagral's crude warhammer directly onto the shrine at Fallowstone Cave, the very shrine the giants had defiled in the first place, and it is only there, resting on ground the tribe fought and bled to reclaim, that the transformation actually occurs. The reward is not separate from the redemption. It is bound directly to the site of the original humiliation, forged in the exact place where Largashbur's failure began, as though Malakath wanted the weapon's very origin to carry a permanent reminder of what it took to earn it. Volendrung's power reflects Malakath's own nature almost perfectly. Where other artifacts drain magicka or inflict subtle curses, Volendrung is blunt and overwhelming in its effect, capable of draining a staggering amount of stamina from anything it strikes, leaving enemies exhausted and defenseless in a way that mirrors exactly what Malakath demanded of his followers throughout this entire ordeal. Prove your strength, or be broken by your own weakness. There is no subtlety in Volendrung's design because there was no subtlety in the lesson Malakath was trying to teach. Strength earns respect. Weakness earns curses. It is a harsh philosophy, but it is entirely consistent with a god whose entire domain is built around outcasts who have learned, often through brutal experience, that the world does not extend mercy to those who cannot defend themselves. Records that surface from other corners of Tamriel's history suggest that Volendrung's story does not simply end with Largashbur. Fragments of its handle have reportedly turned up for sale in shady markets far from Skyrim, changing hands for considerable sums among collectors who understood exactly what they were purchasing. There is even an account of Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness, stealing the hammer from Malakath outright during a period of considerable turmoil in Cyrodiil, simply for the entertainment of watching the chaos it caused once loosed among mortal armies, before locking it away in his own strange collection within the Shivering Isles, occasionally letting the insane test its power for his private amusement. Whether any of that is a comfort or simply one more reminder that no Daedric artifact ever truly belongs to the mortal who carries it, even a weapon forged specifically as a reward for loyalty and strength, can still be plucked away by a rival prince the moment it suits someone else's entertainment. What lingers about Volendrung's origin is not really the hammer itself, impressive as it is, but the portrait of Lagashbur left behind once the quest concludes. This is a community that spent weeks under siege because their spiritual protector judged them unworthy, that watched their own chief try to manipulate a stranger into risking death on his behalf, and that only found relief because an outsider was willing to do what their leadership could not. Gulazob inherits a tribe that has been tested and found wanting, then given one more chance, and the shrine at Fallowstone Cave stands as a permanent reminder of exactly how close they came to losing everything. Malakath's followers across Tamriel understand something that outsiders often miss about him. He is not cruel for the sake of cruelty. He is exacting because the world he watches over offers no protection to those who cannot protect themselves, and every curse he inflicts is, in its own harsh way, an attempt to force his followers back toward the strength they need simply to survive. There is also something worth noting in the fact that Malakath chose to reforge Shagrol's crude giant's warhammer, rather than simply hand down some pristine pre-existing weapon of his own design. Volendrung did not arrive from nowhere, gifted whole and untested from oblivion. It was built from the very weapon that had humiliated Lagashbur in the first place, the giant's own club, taken by force and transformed into something greater through the ordeal of earning it back. That detail feels deliberate coming from a prince whose entire philosophy centers on outcasts, turning rejection into strength. Volendrung is not a reward handed down from on high. It is proof, physically forged from the instrument of the tribe's own shame, that even the worst humiliation can be reclaimed and repurposed into something formidable, provided someone is willing to walk back into the source of that humiliation and take it head on, rather than running from it. The Mace of Molag Bal, in the city of Markarth, tucked along one of the winding stone streets near the main gate. There stands a house that looks, at first glance, like any other abandoned building in a city full of Dwemer ruins and half-forgotten history. The locals give it a wide berth without always being able to say exactly why. There are rumors, the kind that circulate in taverns and get dismissed as superstition by anyone who has never actually investigated them, that decades ago the house was a site of Daedric worship, and that something about it was never properly cleansed. Most people in Markarth are content to let the rumors remain rumors. Vigilant Tyrannus was not most people. Tyrannus is a vigilant of Stendarr, a member of an order dedicated entirely to hunting down Daedra and their influence wherever it appears in Tamriel. And by the time the last Dragonborn encounters him, he has already been in Markarth for some time, wandering the streets, asking pointed questions, making the kind of nuisance of himself that dedicated zealots often make when they believe, correctly as it turns out, that something genuinely dangerous is hiding in plain sight. The priesthood of Stendarr received word that this specific house had a history of Daedric activity, and with Skyrim's civil war creating exactly the kind of desperation and fear that drives people back toward dark bargains, Tyrannus has come to make sure that history has not repeated itself. He asked the Dragonborn for help investigating, and whether out of curiosity, obligation, or simple willingness to assist a man clearly convinced he is doing important work. Most who cross his path agree to accompany him inside. The house itself, once you actually step through the door, immediately signals that something is deeply wrong. Tyrannus notices it before you do, in the careful, professional way that someone trained to detect Daedric influence would notice small details that a casual observer might miss. There are no signs of aging anywhere. Food sits out on tables as though someone prepared a meal moments ago, rather than years or decades in the past. The house exists in a state of preservation that should be impossible for an abandoned building, as though time itself has been suspended within its walls, held in place by something far more deliberate than simple neglect. A loud noise draws Tyrannus deeper into the house, toward a locked door that stands between him and whatever is making that sound. And it is here, at this threshold, that the true nature of the house reveals itself. A voice begins to speak, resonant and cold, and the furniture in the room starts to move on its own, drifting and floating with a casualness that suggests whatever force is doing. This considers such displays entirely effortless. Tyrannus, brave enough to investigate a haunted house, but unprepared for the reality of what he finds inside it, panics and flees, only to discover that the front door has locked behind them both. They are trapped together, sealed inside a house that has apparently been waiting, patient and undisturbed, for exactly this moment. The voice belongs to Molag Bal, the Daedric Prince of Domination, Cold Harbor's king, patron of vampires, rapists, and enslavers. A being whose entire sphere of influence revolves around the total subjugation of others, whether through violence, corruption, or the systematic destruction of a person's free will. And Molag Bal, once he has his captive audience, makes his intentions immediately and chillingly clear. He wants Tyrannus dead, not driven off, not humiliated, dead, at the Dragonborn's own hand. No, his voice echoes through the house when the option of simply leaving presents itself. Kill him, crush his bones, tear at his flesh. You will kill, or you will die. Even after the mace has fully changed hands and the quest itself has closed, its presence continues to unsettle the ordinary people of Skyrim in small, telling ways. Carry the Mace of Molag Bal openly through a town or village, and certain townsfolk will flinch, muttering things like, "That mace, get it away from me," or recoiling with a shudder, as though something about it registers on some instinctive, almost animal level, even to people who have no idea what it is or where it came from. It is a rare, quiet detail, easy to miss entirely, but it speaks to exactly the kind of object this is. Not merely enchanted steel, but something that carries a residue of its prince's nature wherever it travels, sensed by ordinary mortals, even when they cannot name what they are sensing. There is no possibility of a peaceful resolution here, no way to talk Molag Bal down or negotiate an alternative outcome. Tyrannus, hearing the same commanding voice that the Dragonborn hears, breaks under the psychological pressure of it and attacks, whether out of genuine madness induced by Molag Bal's presence, or simple, terrified self-preservation, against a companion who might, under the prince's compulsion, turn on him first. Either way, the fight that follows is one that offers no other path forward. Tyrannus must die for the quest, and by extension the house's dark history, to continue, and there is something deeply unsettling about a Daedric quest that removes even the illusion of moral choice from its central confrontation. Most Daedric bargains at least pretend to offer the Dragonborn agency. This one simply forces the outcome and dares you to feel complicit in it anyway. Once Tyrannus lies dead, Molag Bal invites the Dragonborn deeper into the house, down into a hidden chamber beneath it, where a shrine waits along with the promised reward, an ancient, rusted mace resting on an altar. But the moment the Dragonborn reaches for it, spikes erupt from the floor, forming a cage, trapping them exactly as thoroughly as the house's front door had trapped Tyrannus moments before. This is Molag Bal's preferred method of doing business. Every gift comes wrapped in a trap. Every act of generosity is actually another layer of domination, because domination is not simply his sphere of influence, it is the only language he genuinely understands. From within the cage, Molag Bal finally explains what this place actually is and what it means to him. The mace and the altar it rests upon were once far more powerful than their current rusted, desecrated state suggests. Long ago, priests loyal to Boethia, another Daedric prince, and one whose relationship with Molag Bal has always carried an edge of rivalry, defiled this shrine, stripping it of much of its former strength as an act of provocation. A message from one prince to another about territory and dominance among the ranks of the Daedra. Molag Bal has waited, patient in the particular way that immortal beings can afford to be patient, for an opportunity to reclaim what was taken from him. And Tyrannus, a devoted servant of Stendarr investigating this exact house, represented precisely the kind of opportunity he needed. A vigilant, dedicated to fighting Daedra, lured into the trap and destroyed by the very forces he swore to oppose, all orchestrated as revenge against a rival prince through an utterly unwilling and unknowing pawn. There is something worth sitting with in just how long Molag Bal was willing to wait for this particular kind of vengeance. Boethia's insult to this shrine happened generations before Tyrannus ever wandered into Markarth asking his careful, persistent questions. And across all those decades, the house sat sealed and undisturbed, its food eternally fresh, its furniture waiting patiently to be animated on command, an entire trap held in perfect stasis for however long it took the right unsuspecting victim to finally arrive. Most mortals could not conceive of holding a grudge across that kind of timescale, planning a single act of retribution and simply waiting, without impatience, for circumstance to deliver exactly the right instrument. But for a Daedric prince, time carries none of the urgency it carries for the rest of Tamriel's inhabitants, and Molag Bal's patience here reads less like restraint and more like the confidence of something that has never once doubted the outcome would eventually arrive on schedule. There remains one final task before the mace can be fully restored. A man named Logrolf the Willful, once a devoted follower of Molag Bal, is being held captive somewhere within the house's deeper chambers, and the Dragonborn is instructed to release him, force him to bow before Molag Bal in submission, and then kill him regardless of his obedience. This final act is perhaps the cruelest detail in the entire quest, because Logrolf's willingness to submit changes nothing about his fate. Molag Bal does not want loyalty rewarded. He wants total domination demonstrated, proof that submission and defiance both end in exactly the same place when he is the one holding power over you. Once Logrolf is dead, the mace fully awakens, and Molag Bal releases the Dragonborn from the spiked cage, its enchantment now complete. The ability to drain magicka and stamina from anyone it strikes, paired with a soul trap effect that captures the very essence of its victims. A fitting power for a prince whose entire philosophy centers on possessing what doesn't belong to him. What makes the House of Horrors linger uncomfortably in memory long after the quest concludes is how completely it strips away any comforting distance between the Dragonborn and Molag Bal's cruelty. In most Daedric quests, there is some room for interpretation, some way to convince yourself that the terrible things you are asked to do serve a greater purpose, or that the victims somehow deserved their fate, or that refusing the prince entirely was always an option you simply chose not to take. Here, none of that comfort exists. Tyrannus dies because the quest requires it. Logrov dies because submission means nothing to a prince who only values conquest. And the house itself, once you finally step back outside into Markarth's cold air, resumes its silent, patient waiting, exactly as it must have waited for decades before Tyrannus ever wandered past it, asking questions nobody wanted to answer. Molag Bal's parting words, delivered with what almost sounds like genuine amusement, are simple. Take care of the house while he's gone. As though nothing especially remarkable happened there at all. As though murder, betrayal, and the desecration of another prince's rival shrine was simply Tuesday business for the Lord of Domination. Filed away, and already forgotten the moment his mace changed hands. The Ring of Namira, beneath the city of Markarth, in the Hall of the Dead, where the honoured deceased of the Reach are meant to rest undisturbed, something has gone terribly wrong, and Brother Verulus, the young priest of Arche tasked with caring for the hall, knows it before anyone else does. Corpses that should have remained peacefully interred are being disturbed. Something is happening down among the dead that a priest devoted to proper burial rites finds almost impossible to voice aloud, and by the time the Dragonborn encounters him, wrestling with doubt and fear he can barely articulate, the truth is already closer than he realizes. The truth has a name, and her name is Iola. When the Dragonborn first finds her, she is not hiding in some distant cave or forgotten ruin. She's inside the Hall of the Dead itself, having claimed the space as her own, out of grim necessity after the actual dead began to rise around her and drive her toward the surface. Iola is a worshipper of Namira, the Daedric Prince of Decay, the Lady of Squalor, a deity whose entire domain revolves around filth, spoilage, and the slow, inevitable rot that comes for everything mortal eventually. Namira's followers are cannibals, not out of simple hunger or desperation, but as a genuine act of devotion, a belief that consuming the dead honors the natural cycle of decay that Namira represents, that the boundary polite society draws around what may and may not be eaten, is itself an artificial and arrogant denial of what all mortal flesh ultimately becomes. What happens in Reachcliff Cave is not a new pattern for Namira. Her ring has a long, consistent history of being awarded for almost exactly this kind of act, stretching back centuries before the Dragonborn ever set foot in Markarth. Records suggest that in the Third Era, an agent of the Blades once earned the ring by killing a vampire ancient who had fallen out of Namira's favour, and decades later, a hero investigating the ruins of Anga received the same reward for slaughtering a group of Arche's own priests who were trying to convert Namira's followers away from her worship. In every version of the story, across every era anyone has bothered to record, the shape of the bargain never changes. Namira does not ask for gold or conquest or even simple murder. She asks for an act that specifically desecrates whatever mortal society considers most sacred about death and the treatment of the dead, and she rewards that desecration every single time with the same ring, an unbroken thread of exactly the same terrible request, stretching back through ages. Most of Skyrim's own scholars have long since forgotten. Iola's approach to the Dragonborn, when they first meet in the desecrated hall, is unsettling in its calm, almost seductive confidence. she does not immediately reveal her true nature. She circles the subject, testing reactions, gauging whether the person standing in front of her might already share, even secretly, an appetite for something most of Skyrim's population would find monstrous. If the Dragonborn responds in certain ways, she opens up entirely. Speaking of Namira, and a place she calls a safe haven for cannibals, a hidden community where people like her, people with the same forbidden hunger, do not have to hide what they are. This is Reachcliff Cave, a location that, until this exact moment, has appeared on no map and drawn no attention, precisely because its true purpose has stayed carefully hidden from a world that would burn it to the ground the instant they understood what happened inside. Namira herself remains almost entirely unseen throughout this entire questline, never manifesting in any visible form the way Molag Bal or Hircine do for their own chosen champions. Her presence in Reachcliff Cave is instead felt only through the shrine itself, and eventually through a disembodied voice speaking from somewhere behind the cave's rear wall, an eerie choice that keeps her fundamentally unknowable, even at the exact moment she is granting her most intimate reward. There is something fitting in that absence. Namira's entire domain concerns what mortals refuse to look at directly: decay, filth, the slow unmaking of the body after death. And by never granting herself a visible form here, she ensures that even her most devoted new champion never quite gets to see the thing they have chosen to serve, only to hear it, patient and satisfied, from somewhere just out of sight. Iola explains what drove her out of the hall in the first place. The cave, once a peaceful and secret retreat for Namira's followers, has recently seen its own dead rise from their graves, forcing her to flee and take shelter in Markarth's Hall of the Dead instead. Feeding quietly on the more passive, easily overlooked bodies stored there rather than the more sustainable, controlled arrangement she once had. She asks for help, clearing Reachcliff Cave of whatever undead have taken hold there, framing the request almost as a favor between kindred spirits, an assumption that the Dragonborn will understand and perhaps even sympathize with her situation. Descending into Reachcliff Cave reveals a location built for exactly the kind of grim purpose Iola described. Deep within, past chambers of Draugr, who must be cleared before the cave can be reclaimed, sits a raised shrine to Namira herself, flanked by burial urns and the unmistakable atmosphere of a place where death has been worshipped rather than mourned for a very long time. Once the undead threat is dealt with, Iola returns, pleased, and reveals the next stage of her plan, one considerably darker than simply clearing out some restless Draugr. She wants Brother Verulus. Specifically, she wants him brought here, to this shrine, under false pretenses, so that he can become the guest of honor at a very particular kind of feast. The plan requires deception from the very start. The Dragonborn must return to Markarth, find Verulus, and convince him to venture into Reachcliff Cave under the guise of helping explore an old cavern for treasure, or perhaps needing Arke's blessing to properly cleanse a dangerous site. Whatever story proves most convincing to a devoted young priest who has no reason yet to suspect the people asking for his help. Verulus, eager to prove himself useful and genuinely unaware of the danger, agrees. What follows, once Verulus arrives at Reachcliff Cave and finds not a simple exploration mission, but Iola and her fellow cannibals waiting for him at a long dining hall, unfolds with a horror made worse by how calm and almost ceremonial it all feels. Iola welcomes him warmly. She is skilled at this, practiced in exactly the kind of manipulation that makes victims comfortable right up until the moment comfort no longer matters. Verulus, growing inexplicably drowsy, Whether through some subtle drug slipped into food or drink, or simply the psychological weight of being surrounded by people whose intentions he cannot yet perceive, decides to lie down and rest upon the altar at the center of the hall. And it is here that Iola turns to the Dragonborn and asks them to carve the meat for the feast. There is no way to complete this quest and receive its reward without this moment happening exactly as Namira intends. Varulus must be killed upon the altar, and his flesh must be eaten, an act that the game frames not as an optional dark path, but as the singular route to Namira's favor. Once the Dragonborn has fed as Namira demands, an eerie voice fills the cave, the goddess herself finally speaking directly, and in exchange for this act of devotion, the Ring of Namira changes hands, a Daedric artifact that grants the wearer the ability to cannibalize corpses freely, restoring health and fortifying stamina with every grim meal, alongside a defensive property that can reflect damage back onto attackers. What makes this story different from many of Skyrim's other dark bargains is the specific nature of the victim chosen. Varulus is not a hardened criminal or a corrupt official whose death might carry some faint whiff of justice about it. He is a young, devoted, entirely well-meaning priest of Arche, a god whose entire domain stands in direct opposition to everything Namira represents: life and proper death against decay and consumption. Iola's selection of him is not incidental. It reads as a deliberate act of theological spite, a chance to corrupt and consume a servant of the god most fundamentally opposed to Namira's nature, transforming Arche's own priest into an offering on Namira's altar. There is a bitter, calculated symmetry to it that elevates this quest beyond simple shock value into something closer to genuine cosmic mockery. One Daedric prince humiliating a rival faith through the body of its own faithful. The Dragonborn does have another option, though the game frames it as a betrayal of Namira and her followers, rather than any kind of clean heroic alternative. At any point before the fatal moment, it remains possible to turn on Iola and her cannibals instead, sparing Varulus and denying Namira her feast entirely. This path forecloses the Ring of Namira forever, but it also means walking away from Reachcliff Cave, having chosen, in whatever small way the game allows, to protect an innocent stranger over claiming a Daedric artifact. Many players who explore both outcomes across separate playthroughs come away struck by how the game refuses to make either choice feel entirely comfortable. Saving Varulus means losing a genuinely powerful and thematically rich artifact. Claiming the ring means becoming, in the most literal sense the game can depict, complicit in eating a man who trusted you enough to follow you into a cave, on nothing more than your word. Namira herself, when she finally speaks, offers no apology and no explanation beyond satisfaction. She does not frame cannibalism as a tragic necessity or a desperate act. She frames it as devotion, as an honest acknowledgement of what flesh ultimately becomes, regardless of the taboos mortal societies construct around it. It is perhaps the most unsettling thing about her artifact's story. Not the horror of the act itself, but the calm, almost reasonable confidence with which Namira and her followers present it, as though the true strangeness lies not in eating the dead, but in humanity's stubborn insistence on pretending decay is something to be feared, rather than embraced. Varulus, in the end, remains the quiet emotional center the rest of the quest orbits around. Even though he never learns the truth of what is happening to him until it is far too late to matter, he's not naive in a foolish way. He's naive the way any genuinely trusting person is naive, taking a stranger's word at face value because questioning it would mean assuming the worst of people who have given him no obvious reason to doubt them. That is precisely what Namira's followers count on, and precisely what makes their particular brand of devotion so much colder than open violence. A bandit who attacks you on the road is at least honest about the danger it represents. Iola's warmth, her patience, her careful cultivation of trust across an entire quest is a weapon in its own right, arguably crueler for how gently it is wielded, and the ring she eventually hands over carries every ounce of that calculated gentleness sealed somewhere inside its enchantment. The skull of corruption. The people of Dawnstar have not slept properly in longer than anyone can remember, and by the time the last Dragonborn arrives in that windswept, mining town on Skyrim's northern coast, the exhaustion has settled into everything, into the miners stumbling through their shifts half-conscious, into the Jarl's own strained and irritable temper, into the general fraying tension of a community that has forgotten what it feels like to wake up rested. The cause, though nobody in Dawnstar fully understands it yet, traces back to a ruined temple on the clifftop overlooking the town, and to a priest of Mara who has been quietly, desperately trying to fix a mistake he made a very long time ago, under a very different name. His name now is Aranda, and the Dragonborn finds him at the Windpeak Inn, moving among the frightened, sleepless townsfolk, offering what comfort he can, while carefully avoiding the deeper truth of what he knows. He explains, when pressed, that the nightmares plaguing Dawnstar are the work of Vermina, the Daedric prince of dreams and nightmares, a being whose entire sphere of influence revolves around torment delivered not through blade or plague, but through the mind's own vulnerability during sleep, the one state in which every mortal creature, no matter how strong or well defended, becomes utterly helpless. Erendur insists that ending the nightmares requires returning to Nightcaller Temple, the ruin on the cliff above town, but he refuses to explain exactly why he, a humble priest of Mara, seems to know so precisely what waits inside and what needs to be done about it. Even reaching the temple's doorstep tells you something about what kind of place this has always been. The entrance is guarded not by bandits or common wildlife, but by frost trolls, 3 of them typically, a threat considerable enough that Aranda cannot face it alone and needs the Dragonborn's protection simply to set foot back inside a building he has spent years avoiding. Once through the door, he has quietly built a small shrine to Mara in the entry hall, a modest, almost apologetic gesture from a man trying to plant a symbol of his new faith directly at the threshold of the one he abandoned, as though hoping it might offer him some protection, or perhaps some forgiveness, before he has to walk any further into his own past. Deeper in, the temple's library still holds a copy of a rare and dangerous text called the Dreamstride, resting undisturbed on a pedestal exactly where the priests of Vermina once studied it. The very technique that will soon force the Dragonborn to relive Casimir's worst mistake firsthand. The truth, withheld for as long as Erendur can manage to withhold it, is that he was not always a priest of Mara. Long ago, under the name Brother Casimir, he served Vermina directly, one of a community of devoted priests who maintained Nightcaller Temple and the terrible relic housed within its depths, the Skull of Corruption, a staff carved in the shape of a skull, Vermina's own Daedric artifact, and the source of her power over the dreaming minds of anyone within its influence. Years before the Dragonborn's arrival, an Orcish war party attacked Nightcaller Temple, intent on destroying the skull and ending whatever influence it held over the surrounding region. Faced with annihilation, the temple's priests made a desperate choice. They released the miasma, a strange, gaseous defense that put everyone caught within its reach, invaders and defenders alike, into a deep and prolonged sleep, a sleep meant to buy time, perhaps to wait out the siege, perhaps to trap the attackers in helpless stasis while the priests found another solution. What actually happened was far worse than anyone intended. The sleep did not lift. Orcs and priests alike remained trapped in that suspended dreaming state for years, decades even, their bodies preserved by whatever magic sustained the miasma, while their minds wandered through nightmares Vermina herself likely found delicious. Casimir escaped, whether through simple cowardice, as he later confesses with obvious shame, or through some combination of fear and a final, desperate flicker of conscience. He fled the temple rather than remain trapped alongside his fellow priests, and in the years since, racked with guilt over having abandoned people who trusted him, he converted to the worship of Mara, the goddess of love and compassion, as complete and deliberate an inversion of Vermina's nightmare-drenched philosophy as he could possibly choose. He took a new name. He built a new life devoted to easing suffering rather than causing it, and for years that transformation seemed to hold, until the miasma finally began to fade and the temple's long dormant threat started bleeding its influence back out into Dawnstar's dreams, forcing Erendur to confront the past he thought he had successfully buried. The journey through Nightcaller Temple that follows is one of the more genuinely strange and disorienting experiences among Skyrim's Daedric quests. Erendur leads the Dragonborn through chambers he clearly remembers with painful clarity, explaining fragments of the temple's history as they go, until they reach a magical barrier blocking the path to the skull of corruption itself. The only way past it, Erendur explains, is to relive the exact moment the miasma was first released, and to do that, the Dragonborn must drink a potion called Vermina's Torpor, and enter something called the Dream Stride, a magical technique that allows the drinker to walk through another person's memories as though experiencing them directly. Inside this induced vision, the Dragonborn sees the temple not as a decayed ruin, but as it existed on the day of the orc attack, alive and functioning, and finds themselves inhabiting the perspective of Brother Casimir himself, watching through his eyes as two fellow priests, Verindulleri and Thorek, urge him toward a statue of Vermina and the chain that will release the miasma against the invading orcs. Playing out this memory to its conclusion, pulling the chain and unleashing the very gas that trapped so many people for years to come, finally dispels the barrier blocking the path forward, and the Dragonborn is pulled back to the present moment, standing exactly where Casimir once stood, decades removed from the choice that defined the rest of his life. There is something quietly devastating about the specific mechanics of that vision. The fact that the Dragonborn is not simply told what Casimir did, but made to do it themselves, hand-guided through the exact motion of pulling that chain, experiencing, however briefly, the same rush of desperate protective instinct that must have driven the real Casimir in that moment centuries ago. It reframes his cowardice, at least partially. Releasing the miasma was not, in isolation, an act of betrayal. It was a defensive measure chosen in a moment of genuine crisis, and its catastrophic consequences, the years-long sleep, the trapped orcs and priests alike, were never intended by anyone who pulled that chain. What actually damns Casimir, what he has spent decades trying to atone for, was not the choice to release the gas at all. It was what came after, the fleeing, the abandonment of people who trusted him to stay and see the crisis through, however uncertain its outcome might have been. What waits beyond the barrier is not simply an empty chamber. Verenduleri and Thorek, the same two priests whose voices guided Casimir's hand in the vision, are still here, still alive after all this time, having survived the miasma's long sleep and awakened, presumably, around the same time its effects finally began to fade. They recognize Arando immediately, greeting him not as an old friend returned, but as a traitor who abandoned them centuries ago, and the confrontation that follows is unavoidably violent. There is no diplomacy possible with priests who have spent who knows how many dream-soaked years nursing a grudge against the man who fled while they remain trapped. Once Veren and Thorek are dead, Erenda finally stands before the skull of corruption itself, and Vermina makes her presence known directly, speaking to the Dragonborn with an offer that cuts straight to the heart of everything the quest has been building toward. Erendor intends to destroy the skull, to finally end the source of Dawnstar's nightmares and, in doing so, complete his decades-long journey of penance for the cowardice of his youth. Vermina, naturally, does not want this. She offers the Dragonborn a choice. Kill Erenda before he can complete his ritual, and claim the Skull of Corruption as a reward, fully intact and fully powerful, or allow him to proceed and watch the artifact be destroyed forever, denying Vermina her foothold in Dawnstar, but also denying the Dragonborn one of the game's most narratively rich Daedric weapons. If Erenda is allowed to finish his ritual, the skull is destroyed, and rather than resenting the loss, he offers something arguably more valuable than any enchanted staff. His companionship as a follower, a priest whose entire arc across this quest has been about atoning for exactly the kind of failure that watching him complete this ritual represents redemption from, if instead the Dragonborn kills him at Vermina's urging. The skull can be claimed intact, and its enchantment turns out to be a fittingly cruel piece of design in its own right. Struck against a waking target, it inflicts a burst of psychic damage straight to the mind. But strike a sleeping target instead, and the staff does something stranger. It quietly siphons away their dreams rather than harming them outright, banking that stolen sleep for later use, so that the next waking victim struck absorbs the accumulated force of every dream taken before it. It is a weapon built quite literally to prey on people while they are most defenseless, converting rest itself into ammunition. A small mechanical echo of exactly what the miasma did to an entire temple full of people centuries earlier. What makes the Skull of Corruption's story so quietly devastating is how thoroughly it centers, not on the artifact itself, but on the specific, aching weight of Erendur's guilt. This is not a quest about defeating a monster or claiming a prize from an indifferent god. It is about watching one man spend literal decades trying to atone for a single moment of fear, finally arriving at the one place he has spent years avoiding, and being asked one final time to choose between finishing what he started as penance or being murdered by the very person he trusted to help him do it. Vermina's cruelty here is not loud or theatrical. It is patient and almost intimate, offering the Dragonborn a shortcut built entirely on betraying a man's genuine attempt at redemption and daring them to take it. Spellbreaker. Far to the northeast of Markarth, in a remote stretch of the Reach not far from the Dragontooth crater, a strange, sweet-smelling incense drifts from a small shrine tended by a Khajiit named Kesh, who calls himself Kesh the Clean, a name that carries far more weight and irony than it first appears to. This is a shrine to Periite, the Daedric prince known as the Taskmaster, Lord of Pestilence and Order, one of the least understood and least discussed members of the Daedric pantheon, whose sphere of influence involves both the smallest tasks and the largest plagues. a strange combination that makes far more sense once you understand exactly what Peryite values above almost everything else. Peryite is not a prince of chaos or ambition in the way Mehrunes Dagon or Molag Bal are. His domain is order, hierarchy, and the diseases that can either sustain a structured system or unravel it entirely if left unchecked. Among the Daedra, he holds a relatively low position, and there are hints throughout Tamriel's lore that this ranking bothers him, that his devotion to structure and obedience is at least partly an attempt to prove his worth to a cosmic order that does not always take him seriously. This context matters enormously once you understand what happened to Bethardam's, the Dwemer ruin that sits at the center of Spellbreaker's story. Kesh explains, once the Dragonborn approaches the shrine and inhales its strange incense, that Peryite once sent a plague against a scattering of Breton villages, mortals from High Rock, who found themselves cursed with a horrific, disfiguring disease that left them known across Skyrim simply as the Afflicted, their bodies mutated and warped, driven half-mad by symptoms that stripped away their former lives entirely. Peryite assigned one of his monks, a Bosmer named Auchendor, the task of gathering these plague victims and leading them to safety within Bethardam's, an ancient Dwemer ruin that could serve as shelter and presumably as a controlled environment where Peryite's affliction could be studied, managed, and kept from spreading further. Exactly the kind of orderly, hierarchical task that suits his sphere of influence perfectly. Auchendor failed this task in the worst possible way. Rather than maintaining the careful, controlled stewardship Peryite intended, he lost himself somewhere within the depths of Bethardam's, and instead of shepherding the Afflicted toward whatever relief or purpose Peryite had planned, he built himself a personal army out of them, transforming Peryite's assignment into his own private rebellion against the prince who had trusted him with it. This betrayal cuts at exactly the values Peryite holds most dear. It is not simply disobedience. It is the corruption of order into chaos, the exact inversion of everything Peryite's sphere represents, carried out by someone he had specifically entrusted with maintaining that order. The Dragonborn, once they have proven themselves through the incense ritual at Kesh's shrine, receives Peryite's direct command: descend into Bethardam's, kill Auchendor, and in doing so, correct the disorder he has created. It is worth noting how transactional and almost bureaucratic Peryite's dealings feel compared to some of his more theatrical siblings among the Daedra. There is no elaborate seduction here, no drawn-out psychological game, just a task, clearly assigned, awaiting completion. The same structure Auchendor himself was originally given before he threw it away. Bethardam's itself, once the Dragonborn descends into it, tells its own quiet, tragic story through pure environmental detail. The Afflicted who wander its ruined halls are not simply monsters to be cut down without a second thought. They were people once, Bretons from High Rock, who never asked for any of this, who followed Auchendor here, believing, perhaps, that they were being led towards some kind of sanctuary or cure, only to find themselves transformed into the foot soldiers of his personal rebellion, their remaining humanity stripped away layer by layer as the disease and Auchendor's manipulation took deeper hold. Fighting through them carries an uncomfortable weight that many of Skyrim's more straightforward dungeon crawls simply do not, because you are not clearing out bandits or Draugr. You are cutting down people who have failed twice over, first by the plague that claimed their bodies, and second by the man who was supposed to lead them somewhere better. Auchendor himself, when the Dragonborn finally reaches him deep within the ruins Arcanex, proves to be a genuinely formidable final obstacle, teleporting around the battlefield with an innate resistance to magic that makes him particularly dangerous for spellcasters to confront directly. There is a bitter irony in this resistance, considering he was once meant to be a servant handling a magical plague on his prince's behalf, now protected by forces that make him almost impossible to properly punish through conventional magical means. Once he finally falls, his soul is sent to the pits. Peryite's own particular corner of oblivion, a fitting end for someone whose entire rebellion was, in some sense, against the very concept of order and structure that even the afterlife under Peryite's authority represents. Fighting through Bethardams to reach him means wading through the very consequences of his failure firsthand, and the ruin itself. An ancient Dwemer complex never meant to house desperate plague refugees in the first place, only sharpens the sense of a mission that went wrong from the moment it began. Automatons still patrol its lower depths, indifferent machines built by a vanished civilization for purposes that had nothing to do with sheltering the afflicted, and Orchander's followers have had to survive alongside them, carving out some kind of existence in a space never designed to be lived in. It is, in its own strange way, as tragic a setting as anywhere else in Skyrim's Daedric questlines, a monument to Dwemer ambition repurposed into a monument to Peryite's broken promise of sanctuary, populated by people whose only crime was trusting a monk who could not carry the weight of the task he was given. With Orchandor dead, Kesh channels Peryite's voice once more, and the prince expresses something that, for a being of his stature, reads as remarkably close to simple satisfaction. "Well done, mortal," he says. "All things are in their order, and Orchandor roams the pits. His betrayal will be punished, and your obedience is rewarded." There is no grandiose promise of power here, no dramatic flourish, just the quiet, procedural closing of a task that had gone wrong and has now, finally, been set right. In reward, Peryite offers Spellbreaker, an ancient Dwemer-crafted shield whose history predates even this quest by a considerable margin, a relic tied to the Battle of Rorken Shalador, one of the storied conflicts of Dwemer history, now serving as Peryite's chosen artifact rather than any weapon of destruction. Spellbreaker's history outside of Bethardams only deepens the sense that this is an object built to correct disorder wherever it surfaces. Long before it ever crossed paths with Orchandor, one party of Blade's operatives, a group who called themselves the Sheath Blades, and who had gone into hiding from the Thalmor following the Great War, are recorded as having looted an earlier version of the shield from the smouldering remains of an ancient flame Atronach somewhere in Skyrim. And further back still, in far-off Vardenfell, a Dunmer vampire named Mastrius, imprisoned for centuries within a tomb near Red Mountain by Azura herself as punishment for some ancient transgression, is said to have needed Spellbreaker specifically to break the curse binding him there, as though the shield's very nature makes it uniquely suited not just to blocking magic, but to unraveling the specific kind of divine sentence that traps a soul exactly where it does not belong. Every fragment of Spellbreaker's story points toward the same underlying function. A tool built not for conquest, but for restoring things, whether a shield's rightful owner, a curse's rightful end, or a rebellious monk's rightful punishment, to precisely where order says they belong. Spellbreaker's function suits its origin perfectly. Rather than offering raw offensive power, it grants its wielder a powerful ward whenever they actively block, negating a substantial amount of magical damage regardless of whether that damage comes in a single devastating blast or accumulates gradually over time. It is a shield built for defense and order, for standing firm against chaos rather than unleashing chaos of one's own. exactly the values Peryite claims to represent, even as his low standing among the Daedra suggests those values are not always taken as seriously by his fellow princes as he clearly believes they deserve to be. What lingers about Spellbreaker's story is this quiet undercurrent of a prince constantly working to prove himself. Peryite is often dismissed, even within Tamriel's own in-world scholarship, as one of the lesser Daedra, less powerful, less feared, less interesting than figures like Mehrunes Dagon or Boethia. And yet his story here is one of careful, almost desperate insistence on order and hierarchy being honoured, of punishing betrayal, not with elaborate cruelty, but with simple, procedural correction. Kesh, tending his shrine alone in the remote reach, embodies this same quiet, overlooked devotion, a solitary figure maintaining a small outpost of order in a corner of Skyrim that few travellers ever think to visit, serving a prince whose greatest wish seems to be that, for once, someone might simply do what they were asked to do. The Sanguine Rose, somewhere in Skyrim, in whichever tavern the character happens to first walk into after reaching a certain level. A black-robed stranger will be waiting, and he will already seem to know exactly who you are before you say a single word. His name, he says, is Sam Gaven, and he has a proposal. A drinking contest, simple and straightforward, with a promised reward of a staff if the Dragonborn can outlast him. It sounds, on the surface, like the most low-stakes and almost comedic setup among all of Skyrim's Daedric quests, and in a certain sense, that impression is not wrong. But the identity hiding behind Sam Gaven's easy smile belongs to Sanguine, the Daedric prince of hedonism, debauchery, and the particular kind of dark indulgence that flows freely once every inhibition has been drowned in drink. The contest itself is almost comically simple. Sam only lasts 2 drinks before reaching his own limit, meaning the Dragonborn only needs to take a third to claim victory, and Sam, thoroughly drunk himself by that point, declares his new companion the winner with obvious delight. But before handing over the promised staff, he insists on taking his new drinking buddy somewhere special first, somewhere he describes with a kind of gleeful, tipsy vagueness, a place where the wine flows like water. And then, without any further warning or explanation, the screen fades to black, and the Dragonborn's memory of the night simply ends. What follows is one of the strangest structural choices among any of Skyrim's Daedric questlines, because the Dragonborn wakes up the next morning with no memory whatsoever of what happened, forced to piece together the events of the previous night entirely through the wreckage they apparently left behind. The first clue arrives immediately and unavoidably, waking up inside the temple of Dibella in Markarth, which has been thoroughly trashed, and a furious priestess named Senna demanding to know what exactly the Dragonborn thinks they were doing, blabbering incoherently about someone or something called Rorikstead, before finally passing out entirely. From here, the quest becomes something close to a scavenger hunt through the consequences of a blackout, and the details that emerge along the way paint an increasingly absurd picture. In Rorikstead, a Redguard named Ennis confronts the Dragonborn, furious that his goat, a creature named Gleda, was apparently stolen during the previous night's escapades and sold to a giant. In Whiterun, the merchant Isolde has more pieces of the puzzle, connected somehow to a lost wedding ring that ties into yet another tangled thread of the previous evening's chaos. Piece by piece, item by item, the Dragonborn is forced to retrace a night of destruction they have absolutely no memory of causing, gathering strange components that Sam supposedly needs to repair his broken staff. apparently damaged at some point during the revelry. What makes this scavenger hunt so quietly effective as storytelling is how thoroughly ordinary the collateral damage turns out to be. Sanguine did not orchestrate some grand catastrophe, a burned village or a slaughtered garrison. He orchestrated a stolen goat, a vandalized temple, a wedding ring gone missing, small, mundane humiliations visited on small, mundane people who had no idea a Daedric prince had briefly used their town as a stage. Ennis will likely spend years wondering what possessed a stranger to steal his goat and sell it to a giant of all creatures. Senna will remember the drunken blasphemer who trashed her temple for the rest of her career as a priestess. None of them will ever learn the truth, that their night of chaos was engineered entirely for the private amusement of a being most of them will go their whole lives never having reason to think twice about. The trail eventually leads to Morvunskar, a ruined fort now infested with hostile mages, and deep within it, a hidden grove where Sam waits, along with what appear to be dinner guests, ordinary commoners drawn into whatever strange gathering has been unfolding here. When the Dragonborn finally confronts him, expecting perhaps an explanation or an apology for the chaos of the previous night, Sam instead undergoes a sudden and dramatic transformation, revealing his true nature without any further pretense. He is not a simple tavern conjurer who happened to enjoy a drinking game. He is Sanguine, Daedric prince of hedonistic revelry, debauchery, and the passionate indulgence of every darker impulse mortals typically keep carefully restrained. And here, the quest reveals its true and rather deflating punchline. All of the items so carefully gathered across Skyrim, the components supposedly needed to repair the broken staff, mean absolutely nothing to Sanguine. Oh, the hag raven feather and so on, he says dismissively when the Dragonborn presents everything collected. You can throw all those out. You see, I really just needed something to encourage you to go out into the world and spread merriment. And you did just that. I haven't been so entertained in at least 100 years. The entire quest, every stolen goat, every trashed temple, every furious NPC demanding answers, was never actually about repairing anything. It was theatre, an elaborate prank engineered purely for Sanguine's own amusement, using the Dragonborn as an unwitting instrument of chaos across an entire province. If pressed on whether this was all simply a cruel joke, Sanguine's response carries an edge of genuine offence beneath its playful tone. Just a prank, just a prank. The Daedric Lord of Debauchery does not deal in mere pranks, he insists, framing what he has done not as petty mischief, but as a deliberate and considered evaluation. What began, he explains, as a minor amusement gradually convinced him that the Dragonborn would make a genuinely interesting bearer of his staff, and so the promised reward, the Sanguine Rose, finally changes hands, a Daedric artifact that summons a Dremora ally to fight alongside its wielder whenever activated. A fittingly chaotic and unpredictable companion for a prince whose entire philosophy revolves around embracing impulse over restraint. Even after the quest formally ends, Sanguine does not simply vanish back into oblivion the way most Daedric princes do once their business with a mortal concludes. He can be found afterward still lingering around the ruins of Morvunskar, apparently having decided he enjoyed his little excursion into the mortal world enough to keep indulging himself, hunting down and killing any mage unfortunate enough to cross his path. He cannot be pickpocketed, and because he is essential, incapable of true death, he will always win any confrontation he chooses to start, a small but telling reminder tucked beneath all the drunken comedy of his questline. However harmless and playful Sanguine presents himself, he was never actually vulnerable for a single moment of any of it. And the entire elaborate game, the goat, the trashed temple, the pounding hangover, was always being played entirely on his terms. What makes the Sanguine Rose's story unusual among Skyrim's Daedric artifacts is how genuinely, deliberately funny most of it plays, at least on the surface. There is no murder demanded here, no betrayal of trust required, no grotesque bargain struck over someone else's suffering. And yet, sitting with the story a little longer, there is something quietly unsettling buried beneath the comedy. Sanguine engineered an entire night of chaos across multiple settlements, upending a temple's sanctity, stealing a man's goat, and selling it to a giant, tangling innocent bystanders like Ennis and Senna into consequences they never asked for, all without asking permission, all purely because he found the resulting confusion entertaining. The Dragonborn never consented to any of this beyond agreeing to a friendly drinking game. Every consequence that followed was engineered entirely by Sanguine's own hand, using someone else's body and someone else's reputation as the instrument of his personal amusement. A subtler, but no less real kind of domination, dressed up in the friendliest, most harmless-seeming costume among any of Skyrim's Daedric princes. There is also something worth sitting with in how casually the game treats memory loss here, how the entire quest structure hinges on the Dragonborn having no agency whatsoever over their own actions during the blackout, discovering only after the fact the damage they apparently caused while under Sanguine's influence. For a comedic quest, it carries an uncomfortable echo of something much darker. The sensation of waking up in unfamiliar surroundings, piecing together fragmented consequences from a night you cannot remember, trusting the account of the very person responsible for stripping that memory away in the first place. Sanguine frames it all as harmless fun, and mechanically, within the world of the game, it mostly is. But there is a reason his sphere of influence sits closer to danger than most players initially assume when they hear the words hedonism and debauchery. Indulgence, taken far enough and handed to the wrong guide, has a way of costing you far more control than you realized you were giving up. Savior's Hide. In the jail beneath Falkreath, there is a prisoner who does not behave the way prisoners typically behave. He does not plead for release through the bars or bargain for lighter treatment. He speaks with an odd, unsettling calm about hunts, about the moon, about a curse he cannot fully control, and about a killing he did not choose to commit. His name is Sinding, and he is a werewolf, imprisoned for the death of a young girl at a lumber mill, killed while he was trapped in beast form and unable to master what his body was doing. Even that description does not quite capture the specific danger he represents, because Sinding's lycanthropy is not the same relatively stable affliction carried by the companions back in Whiterun. Something about his curse runs wilder, less tethered, more prone to slipping loose of his control at exactly the wrong moments. Sinding explains, once the Dragonborn is willing to listen, exactly how he ended up here. Desperate to master his own transformations rather than be mastered by them, he stole a ring belonging to Hircine, the Daedric Prince of the Hunt, patron of lycanthropes and predators, whose entire domain revolves around the eternal sacred chase between hunter and hunted, believing the ring might grant him the very control he lacked. His plan backfired completely. Hircine, furious at the theft, cursed the ring the moment Sinding put it on, twisting its purpose into the exact opposite of what Sinding hoped for. Rather than granting mastery over his transformations, the cursed ring now forces them, triggering an unpredictable shift into werewolf form at random intervals whenever he is outdoors. Roughly a 1 in 10 chance every single hour he spends beneath the open sky. He cannot remove it. He can't simply return it and walk away clean. He is trapped, quite literally, inside a punishment designed by Hircine specifically to make an example of anyone foolish enough to steal from the Prince of the Hunt, a punishment that ultimately cost an innocent girl her life the very first time the ring's curse took hold of him, against his will. The moment the Dragonborn agrees to take the ring from him, hoping to appease Hircine and see the curse lifted, the same trap that caught Sinding closes around them instead. The ring equips itself instantly and cannot be removed by ordinary means, and no sooner has the exchange been made than Sinding slips free of his cell entirely, vanishing back into the wilds. The only way forward, the Dragonborn quickly learns, is to earn Hircine's personal favour by hunting down a rare elusive white stag said to roam the forest outside Falkreath. Only once that stag has been tracked and killed does Hircine finally appear in person, manifesting over its corpse as a great spectral stag himself, offering a bargain: track Sinding to Bloated Man's grotto and finish what the theft of his ring set in motion, and the curse will be lifted. Hircine's choice to appear as a stag rather than in some more overtly menacing form feels deliberate once you sit with it a while. Of all Tamriel's Daedric princes, he is one of the few whose sphere of influence genuinely requires two sides to function: hunter and hunted, predator and prey, and a prince who only ever showed himself as a wolf, or some equivalent apex predator, would only be telling half of his own story. Appearing as the stag, the classic image of the pursued rather than the pursuer, lets Hircine embody both halves of the hunt simultaneously, reminding whoever stands before him that within his domain, the roles of hunter and hunted are never as fixed as they first appear, and that either position, approached with enough skill and nerve, can earn his genuine respect. Arriving at Bloated Man's grotto, the Dragonborn finds it is not empty. Other hunters have already come here before them, drawn by the same promise of Hircine's favour, and one by one they have failed to bring Sinding down. Venturing deeper into the grotto reveals Sinding himself, cornered and desperate, and rather than presenting a straightforward kill order, the game hands the Dragonborn a genuine fork in the road. They can side with the hunters already inside, helping finish the job those before them could not, tracking Sinding down and ending the chase exactly as Hircine intended, claiming his hide as a trophy once he falls. Or they can side with Sinding instead, turning against the very hunters competing for Hircine's favour, helping a cursed and desperate man survive the exact hunt that was supposed to be his inevitable end. If the Dragonborn chooses to kill Sinding, pursuing him through the grotto's winding passages as he cuts down whatever hunters stand between him and escape, the quest concludes with a grim but straightforward transaction. Once he finally falls, an option presents itself to skin him, and the moment his hide is taken, Hircine's spectral aspect appears once more, pleased that his hunt has reached its natural conclusion. He takes Sinding's stolen hide and, through his own Daedric power, transforms it into something new entirely. The Saviour's hide, a suit of light armor granting resistance to both poison and magic, a trophy of the hunt reforged into a gift for the hunter, who ultimately proved themselves capable of finishing what the others in that grotto could not, but choosing the other path, helping Sinding survive by turning against the rival hunters instead, produces an entirely different and in some ways more thematically rich outcome. Fighting alongside Sinding against hunters seeking the very favor the Dragonborn was also promised is an act of genuine, considerable defiance, turning the sacred hunt itself inside out, protecting prey from a prince whose entire domain exists specifically to celebrate the hunt's inevitable conclusion. When the surviving hunters are dealt with, Hircine appears again, and remarkably, rather than expressing fury at having his hunt denied, he offers something closer to grudging admiration. He commends the Dragonborn for turning the hunt inside out, for finding a way to subvert the expected outcome, while still, in his own strange estimation, honoring something essential about the spirit of the chase itself. In this path, the cursed ring is cleansed rather than the hide taken, becoming Hircine's ring, granting unlimited werewolf transformations to anyone who already carries the curse of lycanthropy themselves. What makes Saviour's hide story genuinely compelling is not simply the binary choice between two rewards, but what that choice reveals about Hircine's own philosophy, one considerably more nuanced than a simple bloodthirsty demand for a kill. Hircine does not actually seem to care, in the end, whether Sinding lives or dies. What he cares about is the hunt itself, the chase, the tension, the uncertainty of outcome, and he is willing to reward either conclusion so long as the pursuit itself proved genuinely engaging. This distinguishes him meaningfully from princes like Molag Bal or Namira, whose quests demand very specific outcomes with very little room for alternative interpretation. Hircine, patron of predators and prey alike, seems to hold a strange respect for the game itself, for the skill and cunning shown by whichever side ultimately proves victorious. Whether that victory belongs to the hunter or, in a genuine reversal, to the hunted. If the Dragonborn chooses mercy and Sinding survives the ordeal at Bloated Man's grotto, his story does not simply close the way most spared quest givers' stories do. He's not tucked safely away in some cottage, waiting to be found again for a friendly conversation. He walks free into Skyrim itself, and travelers occasionally cross paths with him wandering the roads in the months and years that follow. A free man now, no longer hunted, but permanently marked all the same by everything the chase cost him. He will not attack, and he cannot truly be spoken to beyond the barest greeting, existing instead as a quiet, wandering reminder that survival and resolution are not always the same thing. Sinding outlived Hircine's hunt, but nothing about that victory undoes the curse he still carries, or the weight of the girl who died before the Dragonborn ever crossed his path in that jail cell beneath Falkreath. Sinding's own fate, in the ending where he survives, remains left deliberately open. He walks free from Bloated Man's grotto, cured of nothing, still carrying the same lycanthropy that started this entire ordeal, simply no longer actively pursued by Hircine's hunters for the theft of the ring. Whether he finds any lasting peace after everything he has endured, the terror of being hunted, the desperate flight through the grotto, the violence required simply to survive one more day, is never fully addressed. He becomes, much like many of the smaller, quieter figures scattered throughout Skyrim's world, a person whose story the game trusts the player to simply let go of once the immediate crisis passes, carrying forward into a life shaped permanently by a curse and a chase he never fully understood the rules of, until it was already far too late to walk away from either one. The Masque of Clavicus Vile. Somewhere near Falkreath, a guard stops travelers with an oddly specific question. Have you seen a stray dog wandering outside town? It is the kind of question that seems almost comically mundane compared to the elaborate rituals, blood sacrifices, and cosmic bargains that typically accompany Skyrim's Daedric quest lines. And that mundanity is, in its own way, the first hint of something stranger hiding just beneath the surface. The dog in question, once tracked down through the forest near Falkreath, turns out to be no ordinary animal at all. He can talk. His name is Barbas, and he needs help. Barbas explains his situation with a kind of world-weary, almost sardonic honesty. He and his master had a falling out, an argument that grew heated enough that his master banished him entirely, refusing to let him return until he finds someone capable of settling their disagreement. His master, it turns out, is Clavicus Vile, the Daedric Prince of Wishes, Bargains, and the particular dangerous magic of getting exactly what you ask for, phrased in exactly the way you asked for it, with consequences that rarely match what you actually intended. Barbas asks the Dragonborn to accompany him to Heimer's Shame, a cave where a shrine to his master waits, hoping that an outside mediator might succeed where his own pleading clearly has not. There is something almost endearing about Barbas along the way, a strange counterpoint to how genuinely unsettling most of this questline eventually becomes. He is invulnerable, unable to die from ordinary harm, which means he can walk directly through danger no ordinary companion could survive, and he is also, oddly, entirely willing to keep fighting alongside the Dragonborn as a permanent companion afterward, existing happily alongside another follower like Lydia, rather than displacing them the way most recruitable allies do. He comments on the world around him as you travel, a talking dog with centuries of dry observation packed behind his casual remarks. And if the two of you happen to encounter a vigilant of Stendar along the road, they will attack him purely for what he represents, only to discover, to their evident frustration, that nothing they do can actually put him down. It is a small, quietly comic detail buried inside a story that otherwise deals almost entirely in manipulation and moral traps. A reminder that even Clavicus Vile's own cast-off still carries a flicker of the prince's untouchable, unbothered confidence. At the shrine, Clavicus Vile appears, and his manner carries an immediate, unmistakable air of theatrical charm layered thinly over something colder and more calculating underneath. He is, by reputation and by his own dialogue, one of the more genuinely enjoyable Daedric princes to simply listen to, quick with a joke, casual in his cruelty in a way that almost disguises how serious that cruelty actually is. He explains, when pressed about Barbas, that he is willing to consider taking his old companion back, but only under one specific condition. The Dragonborn must first retrieve something for him. The rueful axe, a weapon with its own dark and specific history, currently sits in the possession of a Breton mage named Sebastian Lort, holed up in a remote cave called Rimerock Burrow, and it must be brought back to the shrine before Clavicus Vile will even consider reconciling with Barbas. The story behind the rueful axe, which Clavicus Vile shares with a casualness that only makes it more disturbing, reveals exactly the kind of Daedric bargain that defines his entire reputation. Sebastian Lort came to him once, tormented by his daughter's affliction with lycanthropy, desperate for any solution that might free her from the curse. Clavicus Vile, ever generous with his particular brand of assistance, gave him the rueful axe, an object apparently capable of ending her lycanthropy permanently, though the method by which it accomplishes this is left grimly implicit. The axe kills whoever it strikes, curse and all. Lort, whether from horror at what he would have to do to his own daughter, or from the psychological weight of holding a weapon built around exactly that impossible choice, was driven mad by the gift, and now guards it obsessively in his isolated burrow. unwilling to relinquish the terrible bargain he was once so desperate to receive. Travelling to Rimerock Burrow with Barbas at your side means confronting Lort directly, and the encounter offers its own small but telling glimpse into how deeply Clavicus Vile's gifts tend to corrode the people who receive them. Lort is no longer a grieving father seeking a cure. He is a paranoid, dangerous mage, summoning flame atronachs to protect a weapon he seems to have forgotten was ever meant to save anyone in the first place. Consumed entirely by possessiveness over an object whose only real purpose was always violence dressed up as mercy. Retrieving the axe requires defeating him, another life quietly claimed by the ripple effects of a bargain struck with Clavicus Vile years before the Dragonborn ever arrived in Skyrim. With the rueful axe finally in hand, the return to Heimar's shame presents the quest's true and most significant choice. Clavicus Vile, true to his nature, cannot simply let the exchange happen cleanly. He offers a final twist. Keep the rueful axe as a reward for retrieving it, and Barbas dies, killed on the spot. Clavicus Vile's parting comment delivered with chilling casualness that he really should have picked a better friend. Or, alternatively, forfeit the axe entirely. Return it to Clavicus Vile as originally promised, spare Barbas, and receive instead the Masque of Clavicus Vile, a Daedric artifact in the form of an ornate mask that grants the wearer an almost supernatural boost to charisma and persuasion, making merchants across Skyrim far more generous with their prices and far more inclined toward instant goodwill. Before this final choice is even presented, Clavicus Vile offers one more layer of manipulation, framed as a reward for a separate task entirely. Deeper in Heimar's shame, a group of his followers, once suffering from vampirism, begged him for a cure, and true to his usual method of granting wishes, he provided one. Not a cure at all, but a swift death, ending their suffering the only way he apparently considered practical. Once the Dragonborn deals with what remains of these cured vampires, Clavicus Vile offers a wish of his own accord, a genuine bargain independent of the Barbas situation entirely, and the options he presents reveal, with startling clarity, exactly how little regard he holds for mortal well-being dressed up as generosity. Ask for power, and he remarks that the Dragonborn is already nearly as powerful as he is. Ask for peace, and he casually notes that the only peace he could actually deliver would come from killing everyone in Skyrim outright, war resolved permanently and completely. Ask him to end the civil war specifically, and his response carries the same grim implication. A promise to end the war that says nothing reassuring about how that ending might actually be achieved. It is worth noticing just how consistent this pattern remains across every single option Clavicus Vile presents in that moment. Whichever wish the Dragonborn selects, power, peace, or an end to the war, his response always circles back to the same underlying truth about how he operates. Total, unrestrained solutions delivered without any consideration for the specific, narrower thing the person asking actually wanted. Nobody who asks Clavicus Vile for peace is hoping for genocide. Nobody asking him to end the war wants it ended through mass slaughter. And yet those outcomes are always in his mind, the simplest and most complete way to satisfy the letter of what was requested. A philosophy that turns every single wish, no matter how carefully phrased, into a trap for anyone who fails to specify precisely what they meant to exclude. This is the essential lesson embedded throughout the Masque of Clavicus Vile's entire questline. Every single bargain he offers is technically honest and functionally catastrophic. He does not lie. Sebastian Lort really did receive a cure for his daughter's lycanthropy, in the most literal and horrifying sense the word cure can carry. The vampires really were freed from their affliction. Peace really could be delivered at the cost of everyone capable of fighting for it. Clavicus Vile's cruelty is not built on deception. It is built on a complete and deliberate refusal to consider what a wish actually means to the person making it, granting the letter of every request while gleefully ignoring its spirit, and daring mortals to be specific enough, careful enough, wise enough to close every possible loophole before they ask him for anything at all. If the Dragonborn chooses to spare Barbas and claim the Masque instead of the axe, the resolution carries a small, strange warmth uncommon among Skyrim's darker Daedric questlines. Barbas is reunited with his master, restored to whatever strange companionship the two of them shared before their falling out, and Clavicus Vile, despite his obvious disappointment at what he considers an unimaginative wish, honors the bargain regardless. It is perhaps the closest thing to a genuinely happy ending among all 10 of these artifacts, a quest that begins with a talking dog and a mundane question about a stray, and ends with a prince of dangerous wishes forced by his own rules to keep a promise that actually helps someone rather than destroying them. Even Clavicus Vile, it turns out, cannot entirely escape the terms of his own bargains, however much he might wish he could.